Okay, so should be live. You spell algorithm. Algorithm. There we go. Okay, so everybody, please hit the like button to fuel the algorithm. It really helps boost these streams. Share this with somebody who you think would find value in it. We are going to discuss another stream tonight that had Eric Weinstein in it. It was a recent stream on Brian Keating's podcast. We've spoken a lot about Brian Keating before, and we've mentioned and covered many of his interviews that he's done on the Into the Impossible podcast. He is a professor of physics at UCSD in San Diego, and they discussed atheism in academia and mainly physics and how that has impacted science. Basically, the dogmatism that has that believing scientists have had to face, and a number of other things involving academic and educational institutions having issues with, selecting for competent people. Please let me know in the chat how the stream is looking. Hopefully we have a good internet connection, but let me know if it's choppy. Okay, what's up, Preston Brady? So last week we covered Eric Weinstein's interview on Joe Rogan, most recent interview on Joe Rogan, on secret physics tech and front hedge funds for reverse engineering UFO technologies and the history of anti-gravity research in physics, all kinds of amazing topics. I still need to add timestamps, but I only recently got the stream back up. Unfortunately, it was hit with a copyright strike by whoever the Joe Rogan podcast outsources, that to. But I contested it and told them that it was a commentary, and then they removed it, which is very nice, and I'm very appreciative of that. They didn't have to do that, but I mean, they should have done that because that was the truth. But it was nonetheless, very nice. So I highly suggest watching that. We'll try and add timestamps to it tonight. It was over 4 hours. Their talk is over 4 hours. That's part of the reason why it was so long. But particularly towards the end of our stream, it really, I think, got good. There was so much to cover that my brain was a little spastic at certain moments. I feel like trying to orient within the stream, but it was a great stream, I think. So I highly suggest checking it out. Comment any questions that you have in the chat, and like I said, please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm. So tonight we're going to talk about something that's very important to this channel and to my physics, metaphysics, scientific endeavors as a whole, to sentient singularity theory. And that is theism and anti-theism and atheism in science. And we're going to try and just discuss the history of atheism in this, academia and what impact it is having on scientific progress, because I think that it is having an enormous impact on scientific progress. So we will get into it. This is the stream that we are going to be looking at. It's called Are You Kidding Me? This Will Kill Science. And I'm also going to show some of my work tonight. and kind of explain why theism and even the perspective of atheism, quote unquote, that has basically infected our institutions across the board, uh, is such an issue. And I understand that, if you are a self-described atheist, that might come off as attacking. That's not my intention. I was an atheist for self-described for 24 years of my life, and now very confident theist, and that was due to my pursuits in the science of information, essentially in the science of consciousness, and so which became sentient singularity theory. So tonight I want to start off the talk about with something about a talk about faith. Okay, that's what I mean to say, and because you hear so often people who don't have confidence in their theism, or who are anti-theists, but usually self-described atheists, say that people of faith. You'll even hear people who are quote unquote religious, another term I don't like, say, "Oh, people of faith." I do not have faith in God. I don't like that term for me personally. I know God exists due to personal experiences that I've discussed before, and also because it is a logical inevitability. You can watch my my video Theories of Everything, the how-to guide that I entered into the Pace 1 contest that Kurt Mungle put on, to see kind of the logic behind this. But theism is just the idea that existence is a single sentient being, or that the universe is a sentient being, or that the universe was created by a sentient being and usually is sentient itself. So this is theism, and it does not require the belief in any specific scriptures, but I am somebody who does hold the scriptures as divinely inspired. But theism does not require a specific religion. And the term faith is not how I would describe my relationship with God. I know God exists. I don't believe God exists. I don't have faith God exists. I don't hope God exists. I know God exists. For multiple reasons, I know for a fact God exists. The only thing that I know more strongly than that is that I exist. And even then, that's a tough one, to be quite honest. But that would be the only thing that I would say that I know more confidently than the fact that God exists. So what is faith? And I was thinking about this on my way home, while driving the other day and listening to this podcast. And I realized a great way to say this, and I wrote it down. And what was it? It was like, my faith in God is not in his existence. It is in God's assistance. And that was it was brilliant, honestly. I mean, that was, I don't take full credit for that, because that came from, probably God. But I've been trying to figure out a way to say this for a long time, is that faith is part of my life, but it's not in whether or not God exists. It's in whether or not, he's going to help us out, or whether or not he's going to, help me out, or help my family out, or help someone else out. That's where I have to have faith. I mean, I just have to have faith, because I recognize he's a sovereign sentient being, and he can make his own decisions about what he does. And I just have to have faith that he is going to make, decisions I would, how do I say this? That would seem to be good, or that would be grace-giving, or that would be helpful That's what I have to have faith in, because he can do what he wants. I do think that he is good, and that I do think that there's a hierarchical aspect to our relationship with God that makes his actions must be qualified as being good, by us, because he's above us in the hierarchy. It's like, well, what should, if you're thinking about a governmental structure or a work structure, what should be done is what the person who's the boss thinks should be done. Even if you think that it's not the right decision, you still have to recognize that it's still the right decision, that what they want is done, even if what they want is not exactly what you would want. So there's a hierarchical relationship there that does kind of qualify his actions as the right actions. But that's kind of what I wanted to get at, is because we have all these all these words like religion and faith and atheism and agnosticism, and they really destroy the discussion, because and we'll get into this, but I've said here before, I don't think that monotheism and polytheism exist. It's just theism, which is monotheism always by definition. It's the belief that there is a being that is the highest being, and that if there isn't a highest being, then there isn't a God. God by definition is the highest being and the creator of all that multiplicity of sentience and everything that has been created, and is sentient existence itself. This is the definition of God, or these are the definitions of God that qualify a being, the being, as God. And so when people say things like, well, which God? Oh, I think God exists. Oh, well, which God? The God. The only God that can exist by definition. It doesn't, I'm not talking about religion. I think the word religion is a term kind of that is now used by people who are not, I don't want to say believers, but I don't really understand. I don't know everybody's first person experience with God, but I know enough Orthodox people that would not say that they believe in God. They would say that they know that God exists. But they wouldn't call themselves religious. They would just say that they follow a lifestyle that they think is true. And so these words have really screwed up the discussion, because they're being used to qualify people who are sure that the universe was created by a sentient being, but by people who aren't, and so don't even know what that would mean. So they're using words like religion, and it's not a helpful word anymore, I don't think. You could say theological traditions. This is what I tend to use instead of the word religion these days. There's many theological traditions. There's different scriptures. That makes sense. But the term religion, it's like, I know Orthodox Jews that will be like, I'm not religious. I just try and follow, all 613 laws in the Torah. So you need a common set of, like a common linguistic framework. But that is my main point, is that I do not have faith that God exists. My faith is not in God's existence. It is in God's assistance. And there, I will admit, I just have to have faith. I mean, I have seen, God work in my life, in incredible ways. And he's constantly working in all of our lives in ways that we just could never know. But some of it you can know. And, but I, even with his track record, which I'm deeply grateful for, of grace and of assistance, I still have to have faith that he's going to continue to do that. And because he is a sovereign being, he's not a machine. He can make choices. And you have to remember that. But I don't have faith in his existence. I know God exists. information in a single system, which would be existence itself, must be self-referencing because there's nothing else to reference, which means that it must be sentient because that's self-awareness. That's God. It there's no other there's no argument against that. There just isn't. But there's other arguments that you also can't argue against for God, like the idea that sentience must be the fundamental nature of existence. You must assume that because you are sentient, and you know that more confidently than you know anything else, is that you are sentient, which means that the universe is by nature sentient because you are the universe. You are part of it. And your first person experience of being a piece of existence of the universe is that of sentience, which means that the universe is definitely sentient by nature, at least some of it. And that is something that you know more confidently than you know anything else. And you can't argue against that logic either. So, do you think sentient singularity theory could help everyone else know that God exists? I think that sentient singularity theory could help explain why God must exist. But that does not mean that it will help people necessarily have a experience a relationship with God. That you definitely have one, but whether or not you see it or not is another thing. And that, I think sentient singularity theory can help you get there, but ultimately, like I said, that is a relationship between two sovereign sentient beings that both can make choices, you and God. So sentient singularity theory isn't going to, if you embrace, its fundamental assumptions, that does not mean that you will all of a sudden have a specific relationship with God that you might be looking for. But you definitely do have a relationship with God, and sentient singularity theory definitely contextualizes that relationship, and that is the first step, I will say. Maybe in this stream I'll talk about some personal experiences with God, and well, maybe not. We'll see. But what's up, James? What's up, Bearsworth? I'm curious. Do you know that the devil exists as well? I know that evil exists. That I know. And what is the source of that evil is a complicated question. When I first started having a philosophical awakening before I was even a theist, but leading up to that, I had a political awakening. I had realized that politics mattered. And I wrote something, and I still have it somewhere. I never put it up anywhere, but it's called We're All Evil. It was about how people have an evil aspect of them to them for the most part, I would say, and that putting us in charge of other people is dangerous because of that, and that's what it was about. And it was just me voicing my thoughts. And what's interesting is it seems to parallel what Jordan Peterson and Jung and others have talked about with, encountering the shadow, or that, to realize that goodness exists, first you have to realize that evil exists a lot of times. And I definitely had that. I remember once my boss, who was Mormon at the time, many, many years ago, asked, he said something about politics. He said that he was like, I believe in an objective morality. And in practice, I did believe in an objective morality at the time, but in concept, I didn't, because or at least I couldn't understand what that meant, because I responded to him and I was like, how could you believe that? Obviously, the communists and the Nazis and people who do any kind of violent action in the name of what they think is good think that they're doing the right thing a lot of times. And so if that's the case, how could you say there's an objective morality? But then, I didn't realize that that's not an argument against what he said. It was just an argument that people are flawed in their ability to perceive the totality of the truth of morality sometimes. And I just didn't realize that because I had a blind spot, which was caused by atheism. And now I definitely believe that there's an objective morality. It is what God decides is good or has figured out is good, one of the two, and kind of a combination of both. And you have to recognize that there's a hierarchy to that as well. So it's not just, even though it is logical, there's also a logical hierarchy relationship. Like when your boss tells you need to do something and you're like, I just think this is pointless. Your boss is like, well, you have to do it. It's like, well, the right thing to do is to do it because you have to recognize and honor a hierarchy structure. You just have to. It is part of existence. So it's part of the universe. But I definitely think that I know evil exists, and whether or not the devil exists is a question about, what does that mean? But I would lean towards yes, the devil exists. I do think that there is a force of evil that is embodied by humanity and technology and just the circumstances of our relationship with technology and with each other that allows for evil to be embodied. So it might exist absent a body, a physical body in this, realm, but then is able to manifest in this realm because of us allowing for its embodiment, which is kind of what Chris Langan said as well. And I think that makes sense. So the devil does not exist as truly as Satan, as truly as God exists, but he still exists. He definitely does. Evil exists. So, couldn't the devil just be a lack of God? Darkness is the absence of light. Similarly, the devil or evil could be the lack of God. I think that it's the absence of godliness, but it's not just the lack of God. There is no such thing really as a lack of God. There's like a circumstantial lack of God, but there really isn't like if God disappeared, there wouldn't be a Satan or devil. That wouldn't be the case. Evil needs us to manifest, I think, and to move at least. But God does not. God exists, and we need God to exist, but God does not need us to exist. He needs us to have meaning, but he doesn't need us to exist. So, I did watch the Keating Weinstein episode. Awesome. Well, we're going to talk about it now. This first clip is about Christian scientists.
Described at that meeting. I also had on two interesting Christian space scientists, pause scientists, who have been on, and
scientists who happen to be believing Christians.
Who are believing Christians. One of whom, Dr. James Tour, started off life as a Jew, and he is what's known as a Messianic Jew, or a Jew for Jesus. And he, I would say, was one of my most controversial episodes to date.
How so?
Well, I received quite a significant amount of vitriol from about his appearance and how could I platform him. How could I have a zealot and a science denier, even though this person has published over 700 articles and he is a named chair professor at a top research university, Rice University. And most of the
That's a crazy perspective.
yeah, that's really heterodox. And a lot of the comment came from, in particular, a very well-known YouTuber who's going to be on the podcast. His name is Professor Dave Farina. Calls himself a professor. He's not an official professor the way that Jim Tour is, or Luke Barnes, who was the other guest I had on, or Jay. Nevertheless, he makes incredible content for his channel, but he's taken quite a strong approach to dealing with the Christian space scientists that we were encountering there, including past guest Stephen C. Meyer and people of that same stature, Discovery Institute folks that were there. And it wasn't only about that.
I'm getting the idea that I don't have enough controversy in my life.
We need to have more.
Okay. So, for one, what was that guy's name? Not James Tour.
A science denier. Even though this person has published over 700 articles and he is a named chair professor at a top research university, right?
Rice University.
And most of the
That's a crazy perspective.
yeah, that's really heterodox. And a lot of the comment came from, in particular, a very well-known YouTuber who's going to be on the podcast. His name is Professor Dave Farina.
Professor Dave Farina. Let's see. Professor Dave Farina. He's not a professor and he calls himself a professor? Sounds like a pseudoscientist. I'm joking. But I don't know why you would call yourself a professor. That doesn't mean you're not a teacher, but let's see who this guy is. Professor Dave explains. Dang, 2.4 million. This is him.
Welcome to Professor Dave Explains. I'm Dave, and this channel is for learning. There are a lot of YouTube channels for learning, but this one is different. I'm not going to dazzle you with science-flavored edutainment that's fun to watch, but falls short at delivering real knowledge. I'm also not going to just stand here.
Okay, well, I'll give him a subscribe. And I will watch some of his content, but just interested to see what his, perspective was on this stuff. But, if you think that believers, quote unquote, people who, theists, if you think that theists are not worthy of being in the scientific, being a part of the scientific endeavor, then you have to get rid of every single theist and everything that they ever came up with, and you can't include it within your scientific understanding. That's what I would have to say about that. Do you know who you'd have to get rid of? Everyone, almost. Everybody who is currently considered one of the great scientific minds. I'm pretty sure even what was Darwin religion? I don't know about Darwin, actually, but pretty much everybody else. Everybody's like, oh, Einstein, he believed in the God of Spinoza. He didn't believe in God. If he believed that there was a creator of the universe, then he was a theist. Whether or not he believed that God had, interest in us is another question. But, Darwin was thus an atheist with regard to the Christian God, but he was never an atheist in the full sense of the word. He remained a theist throughout the 1850s and 60s, although the God he believed in was now the God of the first causes, and properly speaking, he was more of a deist than a theist. This was Charles Darwin. Every single great scientific mind from, 50 years ago and back was a theist. Every single one, almost. So you don't get them. If you're somebody who claims that theism is that theists cannot be taken seriously in the scientific endeavor, you don't get any theists, and you don't get anything that they came up with and contributed to the scientific endeavor. You also can't argue that, oh well, in the past they were just so ignorant. That's ignorant. They were far wiser than we are today. We are getting increasingly more ignorant, not less ignorant. We're gaining more access to knowledge. We're gaining, but we are decreasing in our experiences that lead to wisdom, objective wisdom. So Darwin was a theist. Oh, but he was an atheist in regard to the Christian God. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. What is the Christian God? I had a debate about this like recently. You know, what's funny is in this clip that Brian Keating had that I in his stream with Eric that I just played, he talks about James Tour. And I watched an interview that he did with him, and it was great. He just, in the interview, though, multiple times, he said he loves the scriptures, he loves God, he loves, the Lord, and that comes off as crazy to people who are self-described atheists, which are really anti-theists. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But what's funny, though, is Brian said he's Jewish, James Tour, but he is a Christian. He's a Christian Jew. And I am that as well. So that just means you believe Jesus is the Messiah. And, that's all that means. And, people call that like, oh, messianic. Are you messianic Jewish? I hate that term. If you're a theist and you're Jewish, and you believe in the scriptures, and you believe in the Torah, the divinity of the Torah, according to Maimonides, who was the second most famous and most respected Jewish thinker of all time after Jesus, there are 13 principles of faith. One of them is the belief in the requirement of a Messiah. Basically, that humanity must be saved by a process and a person, essentially, which it's simultaneously both of those things. That is, much more linked to direct action by God, because we're just going to destroy ourselves because of technology, because of the twin nuclei problem that Eric talks about. But it's really the trinuclei problem. It's we messed with the nucleus of cells, and genetics, that's going to destroy us on its own. We messed with the nucleus of atoms, that leads to hydrogen bombs that could also destroy us. And we also, and we're now finally starting to talk about this, we messed with the nuclear family. We are currently doing that. The nucleus of humanity is the nuclear family. We messed with it when we created birth control. All of these things have to do with technology. CRISPR and fission and fusion and birth control. These are all the destruction or the attempt to alter and manipulate nuclei. And it usually doesn't go well, but people talk about messianic Jews and things like that. And if you believe in the scriptures and the God of the Torah, you believe in the divinity of the Torah and the Bible, then you have to be messianic. That doesn't mean you have to believe that the Messiah is this person or that person. You can believe whoever it is that you want. You can believe it's Nikola Tesla. You can believe it's the Rebbe, who was like a rabbi. Like, you can believe who it is, whoever you want. But to be faithful of the Abrahamic within the Abrahamic tradition of that God, of those scriptures, not of that God, because there's only one God, then you have to believe in the necessity and the coming of a Messiah. But yeah, I mean, it's just interesting that this other guy, James Tour, was like that as well. That's cool. Brian Keating did a video for PragerU while I worked at PragerU, and it was called God or the Multiverse. And here, we'll actually pull it up. Okay. This is how I met Brian, and big fan of what Brian does, and you know, I would call him a friend. But I met him through my work, my previous job, not my previous job, a few jobs ago. But he made this great video for us, and it was about how scientists have faith as well, and they just don't call it that. So here, this is called "What's the Greater Leap of Faith, God or the Multiverse?"
How did we get here? I mean, literally. Not just you and me, but the whole shebang. How is any kind of life possible? The universe is a hostile place. Solar flares, cosmic rays, asteroids flying about. The odds against our existence are truly astronomical. Take it from me. I'm an astrophysicist. My job is to look out into space, at stars and galaxies, trying to answer these basic, how did the universe come to be questions. Well, those who have a religious faith have an answer. God. The Earth's distance from the sun, the size of the atom, and 1,000 other things large and small that allow us to live and to breathe and to think, all seem perfectly tuned for our existence. To many, this design suggests a designer. But from a purely scientific point of view, the faithful have a big problem. They can offer no indisputable proof for this belief. Because of the lack of hard evidence, it's probably not surprising that over 70% of the members of the National Academy of Sciences declare themselves to be atheists. But they have a big problem too. Absent a creator, how do they account for the existence of the universe, of planet Earth, of human consciousness? How do they account for the existence of anything? Well, it turns out they have an answer, and it's become all the rage in scientific circles. It's called the multiverse, and according to many scientists, our universe isn't the whole ballgame. Far from it. These scientists argue that there's an awful lot of universes out there, not just one or two, but an infinite number of them.
Okay, so basically, and that they just have to have faith that that is the case. And by the way, that doesn't actually solve anything. Remember when I said that when I was a self-described atheist and my boss said to me, "Oh, I believe in objective morality," and I was like, "That's crazy. How could you believe in an objective morality? Don't you know that you know the communists and the Nazis thought they were doing the right thing?" That doesn't actually argue against what he said. Just like the argument that the multiverse exists, which isn't really wrong, actually. According to Sentient Singularity theory, there is a chain of multiple verses, and so there is a multiverse, but there are multiple verses inside the universe. It's a chain of verses inside that makes up the universe, makes up creation, and those. But the reason why the multiverse is invoked by people like Sean Carroll is that there is an infinite number of universes out there, and we just happen to live in the one where things are perfectly tuned to life. But there's infinite other universes out there where there isn't any life because the conditions were slightly off. There's no evidence for that. And I actually think there is evidence everywhere of a creator. So people are like, "Oh, there's no proof." I think there's like super proof. There's multiple logical arguments that cannot be bested from what I've seen, that I put forth, that come from a first person perspective, that come from a second or third person perspective, that all seem to suggest that it is inevitable that existence is a sentient being. And the issue here is it's like a fish in the ocean. But somebody's like, "Oh yeah, well there's some fish is like, oh well, I think that our world is made of water," and the fish all around him is like, "There's no proof of that. Where's the water? Point to the water." It's like, you're in the water. It's everywhere. There's so much evidence that God is. There's more evidence for it than I think there is anything else. And it's just, you have to know what that evidence would be. And in order to do that, then you have to assume the existence of God first. And you have to assume an accurate conceptualization of what God is, not a fictitious or immature or just false definition of what God is. If you're like, oh, it's a man who sits on clouds and throws lightning bolts. Yeah, you're probably not going to see evidence for that. But if your evidence is that existence is sentient, and you look for that, or even the idea that the universe must have been consciously, intentionally created, there's evidence for that as well. Now, it's logical evidence, and there's also, I think, scientific evidence for an animator, sentient animator of the cosmos, but we haven't looked at it and isolated it properly yet, and that's part of my goal with experiments that I'm working on proposing in probably over this next year, hopefully. That doesn't mean they will be done this next year, but I hope to propose them publicly this year. I will propose them publicly this year. So, but I love this video by Brian because it's so true, and there's so much faith in string theory is like the religion of physicists today, and there's faith in the multiverse everywhere that you look, and there's no faith in God. And this is a huge issue, and it's probably the reason that physics has stalled in the last 50 years. And it was making enormous progress prior to that. I mean, it really was, by people who were theists. Even Charles Darwin believed in a God that was the God of the first, action. And the thing is this, according to Sentient Singularity theory, the layout of the universe is the way that it is because that's the way that it has to be. It also suggests that the existence of multiplicity of sentience or of the universe, it must have been a choice. Now, how it was made is not a choice necessarily, but whether or not it was made was a choice, according to my work. And so this is not against the idea of evolution or natural selection or of natural laws. I actually don't agree with the fine-tuning argument of the universe. I think that it's not the best evidence for God. Even if it is evidence, it's not. I don't take it as very good evidence, because it's not the best evidence. So it's important that we transcend this idea that we're stuck on, which is the fine-tuning argument. Scientific theists or theistic scientists like Stephen Meyer and James Tour, these people need to get past the fine-tuning argument, but they need to be able to have a framework that allows them to do so, and they don't have that. Sentient singularity theory is that framework. There's other theories out there that are coming out. Donald Hoffman's conscious agent theory and the CTMU is already out there, but nobody acknowledges it because they're all scared of Chris Langan, and that's unfortunate. I think he's done amazing work, but even geometric unity, I think, is going to push us towards theism. I know it will, actually. So will the Wolfram Physics Project. Will push us towards theism. A lot of constructor theory will push us towards theism, but string theory is pushing us towards nothing. But we have to get past our current lack of framework as theists who are scientists. But I like that Eric said in this in that clip that I had showed, he said, not a Christian scientist, but a scientist who happens to be Christian. That's a much better way of putting it. It's respectful, as it should be. Eric once said in a Portal podcast, he said he thought the next scientific dynamos would be theists. He said people of faith or religious people, but theists. And he didn't expand on why, but then he went on Brian Keating's podcast, and I asked him in the chat, like, as one of the questions was, why do you think that the next scientific dynamos will be theists? And I totally agree with that, because our previous scientific dynamos were theists. You know, I would include Einstein in that. I mean, if you're asking, did God have any choice in the rules of the universe when he created it, then you're a theist. Or you're at least a deist. And same thing with Charles Darwin. You're at least a deist. And people argue over deism versus theism, but let's look it up. Deism holds that a God must exist based on the evidence of reason and nature only, not on supernatural evidence. This is my issue. That doesn't conflict with my idea. You know, is there supernatural evidence? Well, what is supernatural? Supernatural, I would say, is when God makes it's either two things. You can define it as that which is normally outside of our current perceptions, which I would say that's not a very good definition, because there's tons of things that are within nature that we hold as, you know, being part of nature that we can't perceive. I mean, there are colors that we can't perceive. There are birds that can perceive ultraviolet, and my snakes can perceive infrared, and we can't. So, not without the help of technology. So, the idea that it's that which is beyond our normal perceptions, not a good argument for what is supernatural. If supernatural is anything that matters as far as the definition, it's when God makes an intentional action to intervene in the way that the universe is functioning. So he set, you know, he had the rules that had to be, and he pressed go, and it's unfolding, and he modifies things and interacts with us within the natural system. But then sometimes I think he can also really intervene and break the normal natural system. And when that happens, I don't even know if it's something that we can easily perceive. Oftentimes, you know, if he turns time backwards or something like that, would you even perceive it? Probably not. But so I think that the deists don't understand. It's kind of like deism is like an immature theism. It's like you don't really understand what you're saying. If you're like, oh, God must exist based on evidence of reason and nature, not on supernatural evidence. Well, if that's the case, then I'm a theist and a deist. Some deists believe that a God created the world, but is indifferent to it. Some, so that's not a defining characteristic. Theism holds that there is one God who is still actively engaged with the universe in some way. Yeah. Deism. The belief in the existence of a supreme being, specifically of a creator. Why is every time I zoom in, that gets smaller. Deism is the belief in the existence of a supreme being, specifically of a creator who does not intervene in the universe. Theism is the belief that the existence of a god or gods, no, it's just one God, specifically of a creator who intervenes in the universe. Believes that the God intervenes in human affairs, does not believe that God intervenes in human affairs. What if both of these are true? Does not accept miracles or supernatural revelations, accepts miracles or supernatural revelations. I mean, that is just, don't define yourself by what you don't believe. So this is not a good way of defining yourself. This is, but this is not. Often practiced by religious people. Appeals to people from both ends of the religious spectrum. I don't even know what that means. That makes no sense. But whatever. So I think that we need to get rid of this dichotomy between deism and theism. The argument should be within theism is, does God care about what's happening here? Like, is he interested and involved? That, to some degree, that's the question. But that is, we shouldn't be dividing theists from deists in with that question. It's just, do you believe that God cares about us, or why do you think God made the universe? Is a question that would answer that, or that would get to that topic. But the idea that deism is different than theism is just ridiculous. I see so many religious people, theists, who are so anti-deists, and then I see deists who are so anti-theist, and I'm like, yeah, this is just stupid. It's just the Bloods versus the Crips. The real dichotomy is between theism and anti-theism. You cannot have atheism. This is why you cannot have atheism. Because everybody interacts with the universe, and you have to have a belief of some type in whether or not that universe is sentient or it's not. And if you believe that it's sentient, even if you're not super confident in that, then you're a theist. You might not be a very confident theist, but you're a theist. But if you believe that it's not sentient, then you're an anti-theist. You're not an atheist, because atheism is the absence of a belief in God. But you can't have that, because we all interact with the universe every single second of our existence. So you must have assumptions about its nature. You can't say, well, I don't engage with that subject, so I don't know. No, you definitely engage with that subject every second of your existence. What's the nature of the universe? Is it sentient? Do you think? If you're like, dear universe, the universe wants to give you things, then you're a theist. But you just, use different terms than God. But if you're like, Sean Carroll or something, then you're an anti-theist. You are against the idea that there is a sentient creator of multiplicity, or that the universe is sentient itself, or that existence is sentient. That's an anti-theist. There are more and less confident theists and anti-theists, but there's more humble and less humble theists and anti-theists, but there is only theists and anti-theists. Agnosticism is just somebody who is too afraid to either call themselves an atheist because they know it really means anti-theist, or they are too afraid to call themselves a theist, depending on who they're around. And I just think agnosticism it's cowardly. That doesn't mean you're a coward. We all do cowardly things. I'm a coward. I'm cowardly sometimes. But it's just, and atheism is confused. Atheists are confused and agnostics are cowards. But not in every way, obviously. That's not the case. I'm joking, kind of. But claiming the position of agnosticism is a cowardly thing. Commit. But claiming the position of atheism is just you're just confused. But nobody says they're an anti-theist. But if you are a self-described atheist, you're probably an anti-theist. Another person's testimony has never been enough justification for me to believe in a deity. Personally, I've never seen any need for a God in the universe. What would be a need for God in the universe? I don't think you've asked yourself that question properly, to be quite honest. And you should not take my testimony that God exists regarding my personal experience. That's why I don't tell it very often on here, is because it's not an argument for God's existence to you. It shouldn't be. If it is, then you're idol worshiping me, and that's bad. I don't want that. Don't believe me. Don't believe that I'm right unless you see the logic. And if I tell you a story, believe that I'm telling you the truth, but that doesn't, if I tell you that I, saw God or something like that, like, believe that I'm telling you the truth, but that doesn't mean you have to believe that that's actually what I saw. You could believe that I had a seizure. I don't know. Whatever you want to believe, that's fine. But if you think that I'm lying, then you shouldn't be listening to the stream at all. Don't listen to people who you think are lying. But it's fine to think I'm wrong in my interpretation of, an experience. But that's why I don't talk about my personal experiences with God very much, because they shouldn't be an argument to you for his existence. But there are logical arguments for the existence of God and the necessity of God in terms of the creation of multiplicity. And that is, like I said, you are sentient, which means the universe by nature is sentient. And you know that more truly than you know anything else about the universe. And you also know that the only other thing that you might know almost as much as you know that is that the universe or existence by definition is all-encompassing and therefore one. So there's one existence, there's one universe, you could say. I mean, there's multiple verses maybe, but I'd say yes. But then there's, if you're going to use the word universe, there's one by definition it's included in the word. And the other argument is that you know that existence is sentient by nature. You know it more truly than you know anything else. You can't argue against that. And I will tell you, don't take my word for it unless you watch these streams a lot and you've heard me explain why this is the case, or hear me in the future explain why this is the case. But like I said, I was an self-described atheist at the beginning of my work on sentient singularity theory. It wasn't called that at the time. I was just trying to figure out artificial general intelligence and the necessities of technological consciousness. But it is absolutely an inevitability that God must exist, and that the creation of the universe was a choice. It's a logically inevitable thing. I mean, and if you don't agree with me on that, that's fine. I want you to challenge it, but good luck. But if you're going to tell me that the universe is fundamentally not sentient by nature, then you're not looking in the mirror. And that is, if you take that in combination with the idea that existence is by definition one, then I don't see how that is not an argument for God. I'm atheist. I don't believe in any gods. There's no gods. There's one God if there's a God. I'm very much interested in religion, but not over any other subject. You don't have to be interested in religion. That's not what this is about. I'm not an anti-theist. I'm not against the belief in God. I just don't. No, you are an anti-theist. You don't believe in God. You disbelieve in God. You are an anti-theist. That's fine. This is not a judgment on you. Like, I was an anti-theist. I'm just trying to get us to understand where we're standing so that we can, orient ourselves properly and look at ourselves honestly and be like, okay, yeah, maybe there's a problem with the word atheism because it can't actually exist. You can be agnostic about Bigfoot. If you don't care about the subject and you don't look into it, then that's one thing. But you interact with the universe every single day, every second of your existence. You definitely have a hunch as to whether or not it is sentient, whether or not you're inside of a sentient being, or whether or not you are not inside of a sentient being. Whether or not this world was created intentionally, or whether or not it was not. I mean, even then, that I don't know how much that is necessity of theism, but that's a subject for another time. But you cannot be an atheist. You cannot have a lack of belief in God, because that's like saying I have a lack of belief in existence. No, you can't do that. You interact with existence every day. Do you think it's sentient? Or do you think that it's not? Like, greater than you? If not, you're an anti-theist. If so, you're a theist. There's no other logical way forward. Atheism is a terrible word. It doesn't make any sense. It cannot make sense. This is why you have people like Sean Carroll, and who, you know, would probably call himself an atheist, but or poetic naturalist he calls himself. But I'm a poetic naturalist. That doesn't mean anything. But or Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins, they'll say I'm an atheist. It doesn't mean that I disbelieve in God. It means I have a lack of belief in God. They literally host conferences where they argue against the existence of God. If they had a lack of belief, they wouldn't do that. It's impossible to be an atheist. I like your streams, to be honest. I don't agree with a lot of your stances, but it's interesting to hear. I appreciate that you are here, Daniel Whitaker. I like, honestly, it's more work for you to be here than it is for people who do agree with me, and I appreciate your just attention and respect, I guess, by being here is and interacting honestly. I think that is respectful, and I appreciate it quite a bit. So it's not a disbelief. It's not having a belief. That's not possible. If I ask you right now, do you think of the universe as being sentient when you go about your day? Or if I asked you, do you think the universe is sentient? What your answer would probably be no. Right? And if the answer is no, then you're an anti-theist. Then you do have a belief. You can't not. It's not an insult to be called an anti-theist. You don't have actually any control over it. Your humility matters into whether or not you understand where you stand on this subject. But you don't have control over whether or not you are a theist or not. I didn't choose to be a theist. I had no choice. And I didn't choose to be an anti-theist who called themselves an atheist. I had no choice. I just had a misconception of what God is, and what I thought God was nonsense. But that's not what God is. That's not what or who God is. God is that existence is a single sentient being. That's God. If you think that that's likely, then you're a theist. If you think that that's not likely, then you are an anti-theist. It's that simple. And neither belief is wrong, is bad for you to have. The only thing that's bad is when you're dishonest. So if you call yourself a theist, but you're not really, that's bad. Or if you call yourself an atheist, but really, you're Christian, you're not even just a theist, like, that would be bad. Honesty is all that's good in this. Then you can argue what is true, but first you have to be honest. I think most seem to internally probably know their answers. Just say, oh, I don't choose, but only haven't searched themselves. It's not a disbelief. I was speaking to other people's testimonies, such as Darwin. I'm not against the belief in God. I'm not saying when I say an anti-theist, that doesn't mean that you hate the idea of God or anything like that. It just means you don't think that the universe is sentient. That's an anti-theist. That's it. I'm not saying you are anti-religion or anything like that. Okay. Next clip, because I gotta step on this. This is gonna be probably a shorter stream than much shorter stream than last week. It has to be. It just has to be, guys. Because I went on. I still got to timestamp it.
Cause, and that first cause then translates into a purpose, a meaning, a reason, perhaps, for which the universe was created. Perhaps there was a subjugation of such an entity's free will, and there's no information in the universe that doesn't trace its back. Regarding these gentlemen, when we were there was, you were the token atheist there. I would say you described yourself as an atheist. I describe myself as a practicing agnostic, which we can get into the distinction there. But these gentlemen,
Two Jews who pray who aren't convinced that it's to anyone up there.
and
That being convinced is not the point. If you pray, then you think that it's there.
I'm not even convinced there's two of us.
Right. I forgot about your solipsism.
But we talked about, while you were there, you brought up, as a voice of reason, I would say, you brought up this notion that I've described in the following kind of logical progression. I was asked to write, an encomium for Stephen C. Meyer's 1,000-page long book. He gave me a 10-day deadline to do that. Thank you, Stephen. So I wasn't able to get it on the back cover, right? So, and this kind of logic that he and I discuss is often phrased by me in the following way. If there is a cause to the universe, if the universe came into being, there is a first cause. And that first cause then translates into a purpose, a meaning, a reason for which the universe was created. Perhaps there was a subjugation of such an entity's free will, and there's no information in the universe that doesn't trace itself back to some source, and therefore Jesus. And the line of progression is a short one. And
I don't associate that with Stephen C. Meyer.
he associated with. I mean, he agreed with me that
I don't
that
think
happens.
he's a therefore Jesus guy.
Well, there's a personal God, right? So there's two properties God must have, right? God must have created the universe.
We're going to have a disagreement. This is awesome.
All right, this is good. This makes for good television. The notion that you can have a universe without a cause is sort of goes back to St. Thomas Aquinas and many other thinkers, unmoved movers and so forth. But eventually that cause has to have a reason, and that reason is ultimately the genesis of man. And in their theology, Jesus is the reason for not only the season, but for the creation itself. In other words, there has to be a personal God, and we Jews practicing, you observe Judaism. You're not practicing at the level I am, maybe, or our mutual friend Ben Shapiro might be, but you still have Shabbat. In the Shabbat prayers on a Friday evening, we say two things. We attest to the fact by standing up, holding a glass of wine, that God created the universe, and not only that, that's a universal, literally universal God, but also personally, He led us out of Egypt. Those are two functions.
You're talking about the Kiddush, where the first part before the wine is taken from Genesis or Breshit, and then the wine is drunk, and it's a separation between the first birth and the second birth of the Jewish people from the escape from Mitzrayim or Egypt, the narrow place.
That's right. And so if you were designing a religion, would you include physical laws or physical forces? And would there be,
No.
Is it necessary and sufficient to have a creation of the universe as part of your religion and a creation of a personal relationship with God?
No.
If you were God, how would you have orchestrated? How would you write the Torah according to Eric Weinstein?
Well, I'm not quite sure. We have to figure out what it is that we're asking and discussing. I think that these are very interesting things, because I think that the first issue is effectively, should religious scientists live under a cloud of suspicion? And if their religion informs their science, what are we to make of that? Is it contaminated? And I think it's very important to recognize that there are multiple ways of being a scientist who happens to be religious. And I've learned this over time. So I've been wrong on this topic, and in coming into contact with higher quality scientists motivated by religion, I've come to understand that there's a subpopulation that is very special and interesting. And it's effectively a population of people who agree to the rules of science. They're not going to cheat on the rules of science because Jesus. But they are going to use the idea of purpose and a personal relationship with God to give them courage to question things that are essentially unquestionable within the union of scientists, that will get you thrown out of the union of scientists very quickly, as to your point. So what we're talking about is we're talking about relatively self-destructive scientists focused on science who get their courage from religion and some of their bearings and their focus. So for example, many of these people do not believe that there's a persuasive case for random mutation as being the major engine of selection. They believe that it is simply improbable, and they point to very often the Wistar conference held at the University of Pennsylvania, the Wistar Institute. And they try to say this is a live issue where the books got closed prematurely. And in fact, it's the atheists, according to them, who were led into error because they were trying to close the books desperately so as not to leave any gap large enough for a God to be smuggled into the canon of science.
Okay, so lots to say about that. I definitely think I fall into that category that Eric is describing there. I get my motivation from my awareness and relationship with God. I don't want to say faith. but I do not try and use scripture to when I talk about these things very often. I do talk about scripture sometimes because I just like it, and I do believe that they're divinely inspired. But I'm not going to, there's this common idea among atheist, circles where you say something like, oh, how can you even deny evolution or natural selection? And they're like, because here in Genesis it said, he created each animal of their own kind, and that's it. And so you're having people speak past each other. One of them is using scripture as an argument against evidence, scientific evidence, and then the other one is using scientific evidence in an attempt to argue against scripture. Neither one of them is successful. You can't do that. This is also why I don't like the fine-tuning argument, because there is no logic to it other than the same logic that's of the multiverse, that's the same logic of the Fermi paradox. It's the same. It's just this, we don't know, so everything. So therefore, there's got to be more things that we don't know. It's basically that. And I don't agree with that as being good evidence, even if it is evidence. There are logical arguments regarding the science of information itself, which is the science of sentience, really, because information informs someone, and it comes from someone. There is a message in the information. Otherwise, it's not really information. And in the logic of how information must be, there are arguments that existence is a sentient being, and that the universe must have been intentionally created. And that is those are arguments for theism. And those are not discussed because we need the field that is necessary to make those arguments in. We don't really have it. And we're starting from this framework where we're arguing about atheists versus agnostics versus theists versus deists. And this is just nonsense. Sentient singularity theory shows that there's only 2 degrees of freedom, always. And there's an intrinsic constraint, an extrinsic constraint, and 2 degrees of freedom. The 2 degrees of freedom in this question are theism and anti-theism. That's it. There's no other degree of freedom. What you call it doesn't matter. Agnostic, atheist, theist, deist. Deists and theists are the same in what matters, at least, like, to get us to where we need to be to even then start addressing the questions that come up regarding the differences between theists and deists. We're not even there yet. And same thing with atheists and agnostics, except there's nothing there, really, because agnostics just stay out of the conversation. They're like, I'm not getting into this. And either they're afraid of pissing off the people that they're around, or they're afraid of pissing off God. That's what's happening. And that's fine. I'm not saying those are illegitimate concerns. I'm just saying, like, that is what's causing someone to classify themselves as an atheist. Or not an atheist, an agnostic. Brian Keating's calling himself an agnostic, but, I don't, why is he practicing these traditions and reading scriptures? And why does Eric read scriptures if he calls himself an atheist, which I don't agree with that definition for anyone, not even just for Eric or for Brian Keating, for anyone. Nobody should be called an atheist. And the reason why is you can't make any progress on the question. Can't figure out, okay, where can I go from here in order to even discuss this? Because you haven't even figured out where you are. You have to orient yourself. This is what the science of information is about. What sentient singularity theory is about. This inside, outside, separate, and oneness that are the 4 primary perspectives that are the base of sentient singularity theory, are the perspectives of an issue that, or of anything, of information that allow for orientation objectively, or super subjectively. What I haven't figured out what's a better way of describing that yet, but fundamentally, I guess that's a better way of describing it. So, but what I will say is that I like that Eric steered this discussion here, because it's very important that we address this idea of, should theists who are scientists who are theists be regarded with suspicion or be treated as suspect? And part of the reason for this is because atheists are afraid that those people will try and push. They'll say, what is it? They called it Jesus smuggling. Okay. Or they're afraid that those people will just smuggle God into it. Here's the thing: there is no smuggling God. You can try and avoid God, but if existence is truly sentient, is a sentient being, and the universe was intentionally created by that sentient being, the multiplicity of sentience within the universe that we can observe and experience was intentional, that must be part of science. It's funny because, when I first started this project that has turned into sentient singularity theory, eventually it turned into, I realized I had like a fundamental theory, and then I was trying to come up with a name for it. And I was like, United Quantum Force Assembly, United Conscious Force Assembly. I was coming up with all these names that kind of described what I was talking about, but I tried to avoid, I was like, maybe I should avoid being overt about what this is suggesting and let people figure it out. Because a lot of people in physics right now, a lot of them who are in this theory of everything space, are doing exactly this. And whether they're obviously not being overt about that's what is happening. But then I realized that it's important to give people the context necessary to understand my perspective, even if they disagree with it. If they are going to understand it, then they need to understand the context of it. And so I was like, I'm not going to try and smuggle God into science. I'm walking right through the front door. This is where Eric is wrong, though, when he says basically that scientists who are theists should be respected. He's right, and fall into two camps. One of them is kind of disingenuous in not using, their goal is to bring God into science because of scriptures, essentially, versus someone who is maybe motivated by God through scriptures and is motivated by their scientific pursuits. But there is another third option in this, really, which is not separate from the second one that I listed, but it's inclusive of it. And it is that those people who realize, or believe at least that they've realized, that a single sentient being that is existence itself, and that a conscious creator, that these two aspects of existence, of the universe, a conscious creator of the universe, are necessities. They are logical necessities. And in that case, you cannot not have it be part of the science that you do. It's not just a guide. It is the foundation. Okay? And this is not allowed. But there's also nobody else who's really doing this. I would say maybe Chris Langan was doing this, and I'd say that there are people now that are doing it who aren't really being, there's like Donald Hoffman is doing this, and Bernardo Kastrup and others are doing this, but they're just not being, I feel like, as overt as I am, even though they are being pretty overt. But most of the people who are called Christian scientists are trying to look for evidence in science of the accuracy of scriptures. That's not that's not a good idea, because you're going to be basically presenting this case to somebody who doesn't even believe that the scriptures are divinely inspired. Then they should believe in the existence of God because there's evidence in the scriptures of you know, an understanding of the natural order. That doesn't make any sense. And we need a new movement in science that addresses this properly, and we are having that. Donald Hoffman, me, I say Chris Langan is that, yeah, but he's just so he's not even ignored. Everybody just pretends to ignore him, and you know, Bernardo Kastrup, all these people that are part of physics discussions these days, Stephen Wolfram even, like, these people are steering this science back towards theism. And you know, there's this statement in Jewish metaphysical texts somewhere that I've heard, is that eventually the knowledge of God comes back into the world, which basically means like science reestablishes a theistic narrative. And this makes, I'm not saying that you should believe it because it's in some metaphysical texts. I'm just saying that it is there, so somebody predicted it. I mean, they're just philosophical texts. That's all they are. So I'm not saying, oh, this is a divine prediction. It's just a philosophical prediction. Like the singularity is a prediction. This is happening right now. Like, it's absolutely happening. And that is not the same as just being motivated by scriptures or something. This is why religion is such a bad term to use. Scientists who are theists cannot, if they're good or they're good scientists, they should not just have their theism be separate from their science. There is no separating theism from science if theism is true. Even if you call yourself an atheist and you're an anti-theist, you have to agree with me on that. If existence is sentient being and the universe was an intentional creation, there is no separating that from science if it's true. There is no need to smuggle that idea. If it's true and there's a logical argument for it, you have to bring it, or you're going to confuse people. That doesn't. Now, there are other things, you know, though, that I will say that I don't talk about my beliefs regarding specific scriptures too much when I'm talking about this stuff. I usually will talk about it, but it's that I will keep separate publicly from my work on the science of information, which is sentient singularity theory, but or the science of sentience. But there is no need to block out people. You cannot block out people who you think are trying to bring God into science if they are doing it in a proper way, which means they're not referencing supernatural explanations like scripture or like a personal experience. But if they're as the, you know, what other, and they're not saying that that's what you need to consider. No, you don't need to consider scripture. I believe scripture is divinely inspired, but you don't need to consider that. I believe I have had personal experiences with God. You don't need to consider that. But what you do need to consider are my logical arguments that existence is fundamentally sentient by nature, and that must be assumed by everyone, and that existence is fundamentally and inherently one. You have to contend with that. You know, you can argue against it, but like, you have to argue against it. You can't ignore it and say that that's God smuggling. And I have faced so much hostility when I've brought this theory in because people realize very quickly, even subconsciously, that it implies a God. And they don't want that. And I understand that. There's lots of reasons why you wouldn't want God to exist. But there's more reasons why you would, but that's for another discussion. But it's this idea that you can't bring God into science, but you can have scientists who are theists who are motivated by their theism, but they can't bring their theism into science. No. If they're good scientists and their theism is based on their scientific pursuits, like mine, which is not normal, and I recognize that it's not the norm, then those people have to bring theism into science. If your theism is based on scripture, you cannot bring your theism into science. If your theism is based on your scientific pursuits like mine, and then maybe you came to scripture afterwards like me, but or you never came to believe in any scriptures or theological traditions that we currently have, then you still have to bring your theism into science. And you have to be allowed to. You have to be allowed to. Or else we need to exclude those people from the scientific discussion who will not allow you to bring it. Because those people are being disingenuous and not being humble in their pursuit of truth. You have to, if somebody makes the logical argument, you have to contend with it. That's all I'm saying. So, it's one thing to smuggle Jesus, I would say, and it's another thing to smuggle God. And I say that as someone who is also Christian, like, as a Jewish Christian. Like, they're not the same thing. I'm not going to bring who I think the Messiah is really into my theory, but my theory is theism. Absolutely. And I'm not smuggling that. I'm overt, and it must be allowed to be included in the scientific discussion. But I still appreciate what Eric is saying here, that we need to allow people who have, who are religious and take them seriously. But I also agree with him that we can't be allowing for scripture smuggling. I would say that. Scripture smuggling, or like, prophet smuggling or Jesus smuggling, that cannot be allowed for. We can discuss those as potentialities once you're theist, but among theists. But if we're just making the argument for theism, like, it has to come from logic and scientific evidence, and there's plenty.
That the Richard Dawkins of the world, who have contributed, in my estimation, hugely to modern evolutionary theory, are so afraid of dealing with religious colleagues that they were eager to shut the books and not give many of these people their due. And what's more, the concept of intelligent design is a really interesting one. Now, my brother, who I think has just brilliant turns of phrase and insights into evolutionary theory, one of his, Richard Dawkins, I think, wants to be remembered for the meme, not as the GIF that gets sent over Twitter, but the meme and the extended phenotype is his greatest contributions. And I think one of Brett's better ideas is understanding perception-mediated selection. It is very clear that when you have various breeds of dog, they are intelligently designed. When you produce a mule from a donkey and a horse that is not a natural animal, you are producing an intelligently designed animal. When you create orchid varieties. So in all of these cases, you have to admit that Darwinian theory has perception-mediated selection, display of bowerbirds, where they build these structures and adorn them with blue in some cases. Perception-mediated selection is a form of endogenous design which is intelligent because it is mediated through perception. Right. It's a good place to study it because the words intelligent design have been made radioactive, right? And so what we're arguing about is, should the books have been closed with the neo-Darwinian synthesis, or should they have been left open? And I have to say, I really think that without the religious scientists who are willing to destroy themselves and their careers, but who still do not wish their love of a benevolent God or a fearsome Old Testament God or a personal Jesus Christ I believe that many of those people are responsible for prying the books open when Dawkins and company wished to close them prematurely. And I'm honestly sympathetic with the Dawkins perspective. I cannot stand what I call Jesus smuggling, where you're in some very careful argument and you've set everything up, and then somebody sort of says, well, I just believe that God's love pervades everything. You're like, oh, brother, do I really have to listen to this? On the other hand, going toe to toe with some of these religious scientists is an eye-opening experience because they are highly motivated they know that they're heretics. And if you think about, let's say, Galileo's heresy, they are in some sense the heretics of today, and their reputations are burned at the stake. They're not Bruno in
1600
in the square.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that what we have to say is that many of these people are making points that atheists wish would go away.
What is the strongest, or give me a couple of arguments from design that appeal intellectually?
Well, I'm particularly motivated by two systems in perception-mediated selection, one of which has to do with the lampacillus muscle, which produces a meaty lip that extends outside of its shell in clearly the form of a bait fish for bass in clear streams. And when a bass swims by, the muscle wiggles this little piece of meat that is outside, and it looks exactly like a fish in the stream. And the bass sometimes fall for it, sometimes see the ruse. But if they fall for it, the bass clamps down on the lip, and all of the young of the muscle, of the lampacillus muscle, diffuse into the gills of the bass, clamp on to get a blood meal, and are taken away by the bass to distribute them in the stream where the muscle doesn't have the ability to spread its young. There's no way you can tell me that that isn't an intelligently designed system, and it's the bass that is the intelligence. And the bass is...
Okay, so here I will also say this. We have certain words, like I said, that are destroying this discussion. One of them is random. So when people say things like random mutation is the driver of natural selection, that is mathematically and logically impossible. There is no such thing as randomness. Randomness is just that which appears to be random is just that which you do not understand the context of. That's it. There is no logical reason for randomness to exist. There's coherence and there's decoherence. But the thing is that coherence, for decoherence to exist, coherence must exist. And neither one of these two things is random, because decoherence is still when information is screwed up and destroyed within the context of its existence, which is all information really is context. People are like information in context and information outside of context. When you really, really look into information and you philosophically examine it as deeply as you can, you realize that information is context. It's not out of context information and in context information. It's just information is context. Now, you can sometimes perceive that context, and sometimes you can't. But that doesn't mean it's not there. And the destruction of the context of information is the destruction of the information itself. This system does not have any room for randomness at all. There is multiple agents who are acting and according to a goal, sometimes cooperatively, sometimes individualistically, and that is what is happening. But there is no randomness. It's not just bubbles floating around randomly. That can't even happen randomly. Pool is able to be played as a game. Anything is able to be played as a game. Anything is able to be done at all because randomness cannot exist. You can catch a baseball because randomness does not exist. You can play pool because randomness does not exist. And geometry it doesn't allow for randomness. Okay? and you have multiple agents using geometric restrictions, to accomplish a goal in the game of pool, but there is no randomness. Even if a breeze moves the 8-ball into the pocket, and like, that's not random, because there's other things going on that caused it. It's just random in regards to the goals of the two people playing pool, maybe, but it's not random. And it's ultimately traceable back to a cause, which was ultimately traceable back to an agent. There is no such thing as randomness. The idea that random mutation is the driver of natural selection it's nonsense. It's as nonsense as the concept of atheism. I work with and breed reptiles. I have more geckos over there than I can count, of different kinds and colors, and I have geckos over there that reproduce asexually. They're parthenogenic. They're just females that clone themselves, and there's little tiny differences in certain colonies that I have because they don't have natural selection, so they don't have sexual selection, so they don't have the variety that sexually reproductive animals do. And then I also have snakes over there that I've been breeding generation after generation to be white ones and black ones and yellow ones and red ones and brown ones and gray ones. None of that is random. None of it is random. I am the selective pressure that is causing them to, over generations, move towards a certain color. But in the wild, it's something else. But it's not random. And the idea that there's like faulty genes, and I've talked about this before, but my wife and I have suffered some miscarriages, and when you ask what causes an early miscarriage, they're like, sometimes it's just there's a random problem. It just happens. There's no such thing as randomness. That's like the hardest thing to realize there, because it means that there's something causing it, which ultimately means there's someone causing it, whether consciously or unconsciously, but that's true of everything. There's no such thing as randomness. There are things beyond your perception. That's true. There's no such thing as random. Theists are definitely the heretics of today. But what's funny is that the orthodoxy of today has not accomplished the majority of the scientific achievements. It's theists. Isaac Newton, not an atheist. Albert Einstein, not an atheist. People are like, he's a deist. Doesn't matter. Believes in God. He just doesn't have as much faith that I have, that I don't even say it's faith for me with this, but that God is concerned with what's happening here. Of course he's concerned with what's happening here. He's concerned with what's happening everywhere. But that doesn't mean he's directly, if you get into a car accident, that's because of God. Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it's because, people don't know how to drive. Okay. Next clip. This next clip is about, to change the subject a little bit, societal problems. And I've said here before, I actually think that academia and our education system is the cause of most of these problems. And
I want to say the following. The university system has now ingested these.
It's the cause of a lot of these problems, but there's other issues that I've talked about, lack of marriage when it comes to societal cohesion and stuff like that. But you could trace even that back to the education system. But I want to talk about the impact that the education system has had on us and why our current scientific leaders, who are not leading us really anywhere, are atheists, why I was an atheist. Because I think it is also due to our education system. And Brian's going to talk about academia here as insofar as everything being downstream from it in our government and media and things like that, and that's definitely true. But there are selective pressures that have selected for atheism in the people who have been given academic credentials in the scientific fields. And that has very much caused the rise of people being described as atheists, or describing themselves as atheists. This is a multifaceted problem. For one, I think that the fact that we started unifying educational institutions, which is what we're doing with media too. It's like, and food companies and corporations, everything buys another one, buys another one, buys another one. Eventually you're left with like, one company owns all the food, that you eat. But that wasn't always the case. And it wasn't always the case with education either. But as it has happened with education, it has required that it has been more or less exclusive, and it has been less selective in how it presents certain things, one of them being theism or God or religion. And so if you have everybody going to these public schools, and then you have religious people who are like, they need to learn religion, and then and they're Christian, and then you have Hindu people who are going to that same school who are like, we need them to learn Hinduism. And then you have Muslims who are going to that school who are like, you need to teach them Islam. And then you have people who don't claim any theological tradition specifically, saying, don't claim any of these. Then what happens is in school, you get all of them taught at once. I remember this happened to me. You have science taught, and then you have religion. Religion is taught as lots of different religions at once, basically. And you go into your social studies class or whatever, and they give you a little test, and you're like, what do you believe? This, and this. Well, maybe this is the best religion for you, Buddhism. And I remember everybody was a Buddhist. Everybody who wasn't Christian ended up being a Buddhist when they took these little tests that our teachers gave us in school. And they taught us all of these things. And what this does is it sets it up in your mind such that these are competing ideologies. And not only are they competing ideologies, but the idea of theism itself is now a competing ideology because of intelligent design and natural and being it presented as the antithesis of natural selection, and that creationism is presented as the antithesis of evolution. And I remember I've talked about this before. I asked my wife early on in our relationship. I was still self-described atheist, and she was a Christian. And I work with animals, and I study reptiles with some of the top herpetologists in the world in the wild. I am very aware of natural selection, sexual selection, ecology and evolution, and of its existence. And because I've seen it in the wild and in my own home. And I asked her, I was like, do you believe God created the universe, or do you believe in evolution? She was like, both. I was like, wow, these two things are not mutually exclusive. But it's presented as mutually exclusive in school. And people see the rationale behind sexual selection, natural selection, evolution, and they're like, yeah, that makes sense. I can see that around me in things. That's dogs. That's how you get dogs. Different breeds of dogs. That's how we get different crops and things like that. That's how people end up with different traits. If that's true, then I guess God must be fake. And it's also because now we're going to these schools that because they're for everybody, they're not taking a hard stance on theism in any way, that they only teach like a semester of religion in public school. There's no deep theological, philosophical discussions that go on as you get older and older. I asked my rabbi after I realized that theism was a logical inevitability. I was like, Rabbi, I can't believe that this. I think everybody's has a misconception of God who calls themselves an atheist, and he was like, well, they stopped their theological education and exploration at when they were a child. I did. I got bar mitzvahed and I was out. And guys, by the way, I remember before I had my bar mitzvah, so at 13, I was 12, and I had to meet with our rabbi, and my rabbi was like, "Do you believe in God? Or what do you think about God?" And I was like, "I don't think God exists. I think that these stories are fake." He was like, "How could you say that? Why do you think that?" And I was like, "Because it says the world was created in 7 days, and I know that dinosaurs were here for millions of years, and millions of years ago, and I know that we evolved, and that other things have been evolving for millions of years. So I know it's been a lot longer than 7 days." And he was like, "Well, what if one day for God is different than one day for us?" And I was like, "Nah, that's a cop-out argument." And it kind of is. But when you realize that the direct translation of the Hebrew is God created the world in 7 yom, which is, the word yom means period. It doesn't mean day necessarily. It's used to mean day sometimes, but it means period. Like a day is a period, a month is a period, a year is a period. These are all, different periods of time. And it just says God created the world in 6 yom, really, and rested on the 7th. Okay, that's a different thing, but regardless, it just shows a lack of understanding can cause you to take a nonsensical perspective and maintain it for decades. I maintained it for decades. The idea that the universe was created intentionally? Well, because I know that evolution has been going on for millions of years, that definitely can't be the case. They're not related. So I think that our education system has really screwed us. And now that it has caused all these people who have very little theological, philosophical experience as far as like exploring the idea of theism, and who adopted very early on in their life the idea of Darwinian evolution, which is not wrong. I think it's correct, actually, but it's just not the entire story. And they've therefore rejected theism wrongly. Those people have now been credentialed by our institutions, by our higher education systems, like within academia, and are now considered the leaders. So our early education system screwed this up, and then incentivized a watered down to the point of non-existence, exploration of theism, and also hogged all of our time, because you're there from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. every single day for majority of your time awake when you're in your intellectually developing years. And then you go on to these institutions, these universities and such, that have given people credentials who are just very good at repeating what they were taught in schools in the years prior. And so now they're telling us that God doesn't exist, and we're all taking their word for it. And it's literally because our education system screwed us up in multiple ways. It selected for the wrong messengers, and it indoctrinated those messengers, or restricted their thinking. So
divisions of diversity, equity, inclusion, vice chancellor. There's an apparatus, there's a structure, it's detailed. We're not the first people to talk about it. We already referred to Heather McDonald. You can go there to see it. What about if the secret, and all these things are coming downstream from academia? In other words, the political class, the infighting, the lack of fear over Ukraine.
The BA.
Right. Okay. So I want to pivot to that brings up my next topic. Maybe we need a different model for academia. Maybe we need the nonprofit or the kind of scholastic for its own sake approach is no longer relevant in the 21st century. After all, it's 1,000 years old.
I don't want to do this.
So what you don't think that there's an opportunity to
For
replace the
5
current
years, we went
academic?
crazy. Okay, so we have this like red guard, and the red guard took over. I'm not going to pretend.
Hey, forget about that then. To just say is
It's not just the Red Guard. It's the people who were the system selected for credentialing leaders who were actually just followers, they were actually just parrots, and they were not thinking. The people who thought the least are the ones who are being credentialed the most. And obviously there are exceptions, but this is the rule that's causing the problems. Atheism and its rise, and also its assumption in the scientific narrative, is literally holding our physics back, and our evolutionary theory back. I mean, there's so much more to sentient singularity theory proposes two to four parts to evolution that are not discussed in it's just random selection, and through random mutation, natural selection through selective pressures, and sexual selection, and that's it. No. There's so much more incredible beauty and interesting aspects to this process that is not being discussed, and it's being held back because of the education system causing us to identify as atheists, which it doesn't even make sense. It's not even a concept that makes any sense. That's how, like, good luck fixing this, with arguing scripture. That's not going to happen. I mean, not saying there's no point in arguing scripture. There is, but not to somebody who calls themselves an atheist. And not to the universities and things like that. But I do think we need a new academic and educational model. Inshallah, God willing, I will have children, and those children will be homeschooled. And I think that is going to be the future, and I think it is the way. It is the way. I'm not saying it will be the way that most people go, but it is the way to get your kids to be thinkers. That you can't set them at a desk the majority of their waking hours and where they should have been thinking and problem solving, and just have them sitting at a desk and absorbing and regurgitating information and expect them to be good at thinking. You need to learn. Thinking is it's an active process. You have to practice it. Like ukulele. Like if you don't practice thinking, you're not going to be good at it. And you need feedback from thinking. Like you can't just sit there and be thinking. People say this all the time. Like, I know Lex says this a lot, and I'm not saying that he doesn't think, but he'll sit there and he'll be like, I just have such deep thoughts. And I used to say that too. And, a lot of thinking is much simpler than we make it out to be. But I think that if you're focused on trying to have deep thoughts, like, you're not going to get anywhere. Like, just focus on thinking productively. Does your thinking lead to other things? People are like, oh, infinity. Can we even conceptualize it? It's like, well, what would infinity mean if it meant anything that we could conceptualize of? How about that as a first question? Maybe it's just, something, process that starts and then grows infinitely from there. What's infinite growth? Like, isn't that just infinity? That's pretty easy to think about, actually. Something just continues to get bigger and bigger over time, or some singularity multiplies into multiplicity infinitely. That is infinity. Think about numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It goes on infinitely. It has start, but it doesn't have an end. Okay, that's not that deep of a thought. But you need to be able to be in an environment that allows for you to think, and also has feedback that tells you whether or not you are correct. So Eric Weinstein's brother, said this. He said that education should be really focused on giving tasks that you either know you failed at or know you succeeded at, like building an engine and then driving the car. It's like you need to build it correctly, or else it's not going to work, and you're going to know. But right now we just have memorization. Nobody knows if they're actually like understanding anything. And then they go on Joe Rogan and they say, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, then you don't understand quantum mechanics. Stop. That's not even deep. It's nonsense.
Academia in need of an overhaul. I mean, we've detailed
Academia
already.
definitely needs an overhaul. I don't know how we're going to do it other than start homeschooling your kids. You have to start at the beginning. It's probably going to have to be a simultaneous creation of new culture, but I'm telling you, they will try and outlaw homeschooling because it is the threat to Satanism. You said, if somebody asked if the devil exists and evil exists, and it will try and undermine parental sovereignty always. So Eric talks about money being a problem and all these other things. No. There's no, that is a force that is an issue, but it's not just the issue. There's so much. You have to really deconstruct this and realize that this diversity, equity, inclusion thing was what led to the rise of atheism, because it included all religions, and it was those religions were then taught to everybody by people who weren't practicers of those religions and didn't have an understanding of them. I don't know the religion of the people of the teacher that taught me all the religions during my semester of 7th grade or whatever, that we learned about religions in 6th grade. I don't know what their religion was. I don't think they had one. I don't think that they were even a theist. I think that they just, said they believed in a higher power, which doesn't mean anything. Do you believe the universe is sentient or not? That's a much better question. So it's not a matter of money being the problem. It's a matter of art, of the way we teach. One of the greatest lessons that I ever learned from just being told anything was by a mentor of mine who's a biologist. And it's basically like my uncle. And two things happened. Once, I called him up and I asked him if he had a specific type of lizard that I was looking for. I needed one. I had one, I needed a mate for it. And I called him up and I was like, I'd never spoken to him and I heard he was a mean guy. And but he's very famous in the monitor lizard world. And in herpetology, which is the study of reptiles and amphibians. And I was like, do you have one of these lizards? And he was, do you have any of these for sale? And he's like, yep. And I was like, 12. And I was like, well, how many do you have? And he was like, what does it matter to you? You only want one? And I sat back and I've heard a lot of people get offended by that kind of demeanor that he has. But I sat back and I was like, wow, that's so true. I don't need, that was just a stupid question that I asked because I didn't know what else to ask. And I was trying to just continue the conversation. And then also, he was another lesson that I had. Oh yeah, he told me that he was like, the greatest thing I ever learned in school was in my shop class, my first year in shop class, which we don't have anymore. So we don't build anything in our classrooms for the most part anymore, because that would be too real world. And the insurance companies forbade us touching saws. And but in his era, they had shop class. And the first day of the class, the teacher asked everybody, what are we going to build? What do you want to build in this class? If you could build anything, what do you want to build? Everybody wrote it down. And then after everybody wrote it down and turned it in, the teacher then looked at everybody and said, okay, now I'm going to teach you how to build the tools necessary to build the thing that you want to build. It's like meta shop class. And I thought about that, and it wasn't in that situation, but I internalized it so much that it has stuck with me. And we need that kind of education. Things that teach you how to think. What do you need to do the thing that you want to do? You've set a goal. How do you accomplish it? Now there's no goal. It's just memorize this information. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. It's nonsense. It's causing problems. Okay. 2 more clips, and then I'm going to answer questions in the chat, and I'm going to go. This next one is about how Eric constantly says that physicists need to be paid a lot, and because they're responsible for the modern world, and that's true. But the thing is,
the rate of a Hubble fellow, which is not an
I'll get to it in a minute. But yeah, there's an issue with his thinking here.
What this is a terrible argument, right? The argument is, well, people are getting $80,000 a year or something. I don't know what the current
it could be for both stocks. It's over.
But my point is, if Wall Street is paying way over that, and the skill set is fungible, I would like to see physicists getting 85% of a Wall Street salary with a 15% premium.
Good luck. I mean, me too.
Sorry.
No. Look.
Good luck. No,
Eric, if my kid here at UC San Diego, if she gets into UC San Diego,
right,
or gets into Princeton, or gets into Harvard, she will pay full freight. If I were a Princeton professor or a Caltech professor, if my child gets into UC San Diego, Harvard, or University of Florida, I will pay nothing for my kids. In other words, there's more than just compensation. There are market. Now, I chose this because it was it had a lot of advantages over other institutions.
Okay, so here's the thing. This is where Eric is wrong in the idea that they just need more money. The physicists just need more money. Let me tell you something. When Google was much younger of a company, they said they were going to solve everything: world hunger, disease, everything. Government problems, peace. All they have done since they were created, Google, is they have gained more and more and more and more and more money, and they have created an increasingly shittier and shittier and shittier search engine. That is what they have done. I worked for nonprofits in the past. Some of those nonprofits were much smaller when I started. Now they are much, much larger. They have so much more money than they had when I first started. And they are less competent now than they were back then. Money is not the answer to this. And it's also not the answer when it comes to incentivizing competent people. And it's also not the answer when it comes to compensating people fairly for their contribution to the world. If you're just going to pay them more money, like physicists more money. Here's the thing that what Eric's wrong about, and he also says this, physicists today don't feel responsible for dooming us, and they doomed us, and now they just don't care. And Eric's talking about how he cares about getting us out of the twin nuclei problem, which is that technology will kill us. And I've said before, he says, oh, I'm not a physicist, but he is a physicist. In fact, he's one of the few famous physicists, true physicists left today. Most people who call themselves physicists are not doing physics, as he stated himself. So, why would you call them physicists? Just because of a piece of paper? No. Those people who have degrees in physics, who are, the Edward Whittons and Michio Kaku's and Sean Carroll's, they don't feel responsible for getting us out of the twin nuclei problem because they don't even understand the inevitability of this. And I would say if you had even a greater understanding, then you wouldn't think that we needed to be able to transcend relativity in order to escape, our solar system in order to save us. But I understand why Eric thinks that, at least. And but my point is that those people are not the people that got us into the mess. Sean Carroll did not create the twin nuclei problem. Neither did Ed Whitten. Neither did I don't know. Any physicist today, for the most part, that we talk about, like Lawrence Krauss. He had nothing to do with any kind of serious, consequential advances in physics. Why would he feel responsible just because he has the term physicist in his name? No. They feel that they're not responsible because they're not. If you feel like, you're linked to this problem, it's because you actually understand physics. You don't just have a diploma in it. This is also why we can't just pay physicists a bunch of money. It's because they're not actually responsible for the modern era. When you're like, oh, these people, they are our SEAL Team 6, and they are responsible for the modern era. If you microwaved a TV dinner tonight, thank Ed Whitten. No! What does Sean Carroll's multiverse have to do with my microwave? Or that nuclear bomb, on Bikini? Like, that, they're not responsible for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Those were different people who were real physicists. People who were interested in scriptures. Whether that was the Hindu scriptures with, I've become death, the destroyer of worlds. Oppenheimer said that after he lit off the bomb. You're not going to have Sean Carroll do that. It's a different group. Giving them money doesn't do anything. And it doesn't incentivize anyone either, because the people who cannot help but do physics are going to be the ones that push us forward anyways. Nobody's paying me for that. Well, actually, you guys can super chat me, and I have gotten some super chats, and I'm deeply grateful for all of them. But it's not enough, at least right now, for me to live. I have a second job, like a real, not a real job. I don't want to say what's a real job and what isn't. I feel like this is an obligation to talk about this stuff. It's taxing. I just want to, raise lizards all day. But I have to go to work because I have to pay for the roof over my head and, health care and food for my family and myself. And I also have to be on these streams every week because I feel like I have an obligation to humanity to just, show this work. And, but that nobody needs to pay me. I'm not saying I wouldn't like to get 85% of a Wall Street salary, whatever that means. But it's that argument he keeps making isn't going anywhere. It keeps being made, but even physicists aren't agreeing with it because they don't actually feel like they created the microwave. If Sean Carroll created the microwave or created some kind of device that everybody or deduced the laws of quantum mechanics necessary for some device that everybody now uses in their house, and like the internet, and they knew it, they'd be like, where's my check? But they don't feel that way because they didn't, and they know it. And so but people who are physicists who do those things, they are compensated, whether it's in salary or whether or not you build an entire town for Oppenheimer, to be the king of, that is, Einstein, after he became well known for, his theory of general relativity, never worried about, what he was going to eat that day ever again. I don't know how much money he made, but he was fine. That I don't think that money is the answer to this. It's not the problem, and it's not the answer. There are much deeper problems with why we don't have the ability to have sense making or collectively as well as we used to, even though there's always problems with that, and then why also our institutions are so nonsensical at this point. And it is downstream from education system. It's not just academia, like Brian Keating said, but he is on the right track. We do need some new form. This is the final clip, and then I'm going to answer questions. This is about, Eric was asked what he's excited about, and
she will pay full freight. If I were a Princeton professor or Caltech professor, if my child gets into UC San Diego, Harvard, or the University of Florida, I will pay nothing.
for my kid.
Hold on. Come on.
Me too. Sorry. No.
Good luck.
Sending your kid to university is
I
not
hope that
the
he'll
best
have a
idea
change
right
of
now.
heart and reconsideration, because I actually believe that somewhere in him he wants the best for the planet. But I'm just going to tell you right now is you can listen to an entire conversation about communities and bringing people together,
Trust and safety.
and you don't realize that the KKK is a community, and there's not much of it. But that you do not want to let a few cells replicate at an incredible rate and then figure it out later.
Well, we always end on a happy note here, Eric.
Can we?
I want to wish you
Wait. No, let's talk about something great.
something in science that excites you. What excites you?
I'm really hoping, for example, that artificial intelligence tells us something about the wiring diagram for the mind of the C. elegans nematode. We have a complete adjacency matrix. We have optogenetics, and we have green fluorescent protein that we can attach, so we can actually watch the worm think.
Developed here.
Yeah, it's about 300 or so neurons. I would love it if the same techniques that were put into protein folding or Go or chess were put onto the worm, and we found that the machines could figure out how thought actually occurs in a relatively, the simplest of systems,
Complexes.
simplest system that has locomotion, reproduction, and ingestion of food and digestion. I think that is a great example of something that I think will succumb before we actually have artificial general intelligence. And I really hope that, and this is like perverse, I hope we have a near miss.
Okay. So I just want to say with that last statement, that sounds fascinating. I would like to see that too. C. elegans is a worm that is used in scientific experiments in labs across the world because it's only got like 1,000 cells or something, and it's very good animal for experimentation because it's so well mapped and structurally and genomically and things like that. But what I think that we're going to find with those types of things is, first of all, there are simpler structures than C. elegans. C. elegans is a multicellular organism. There's single-celled organisms that maneuver and move and consume and excrete and do all the things that C. elegans does, reproduce. But what I think we're going to realize eventually is that this is not about mapping the information processing of like a neural network that we call a neural network, like with AlphaGo and AI chess programs and advertising programs and all ChatGPT, all these things. It's not about understanding general intelligence, which is understanding true intelligence, is about understanding orientation and how information is objectively oriented, and that the base of that is feeling, not thinking. And so I don't think that what Eric is talking about, it will be as successful as it seems in getting us to understand artificial general intelligence, but I do think that it would be successful in getting us to help us develop more advanced artificial intelligent programs like ChatGPT and things like that. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Right now, the military industrial complex and the contractors of those companies, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, like they are all currently working on artificial intelligent programs that allow for fighter jets to dogfight. And there's a new program that is being worked on by the military, and it's called the NGAD program. It is the Next Generation Air Dominance Program. It is basically that our next generation air-to-air fighter jets will be manned, optionally manned, but then also be leading of autonomous wingmen, semi-autonomous wingmen, basically, that are drones that are flown by artificial intelligence programs that are artificial intelligence. And I know that they fairly recently put some in an F-16 and was testing it against pilots in dogfights. But that is where that could be useful with that. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but like, or your self-driving Tesla, things like that. But it's not going to be the same as understanding general intelligence. It's still going to be within a niche environment. Even if a C. elegans is a general intelligence, it is. A cell in your body is a general intelligence, but you can't create a general intelligence if you're us. You have to be God to create a general intelligence, which is a sentient being. It has to be a being with feelings, because feelings allow you to orient around yourself, and that gives you an objective point from which to orient from in different environments. And systems that have no self are not able to do that, because that means that systems that have no feelings are not able to do that. So I don't know how close we'll get to imitating that, but probably pretty close. But we're probably pretty convincing, not pretty close. There is no close or far from sentience versus not sentience. It's just how convincing can you make it? We're pretty convincing already. I mean, a lot of these programs, if you didn't know what they were, you were playing Go against AlphaGo, you'd be like, okay, that program is a person probably on the other end. Or if you didn't know that these programs existed. Same thing with ChatGPT. You could talk to it and it would talk to you, and you'd be like, this person is kind of an idiot sometimes, but also sometimes really smart, but it's probably a person, but it's not. So with that, chat. The more I learn about science, the more I believe in God. Good. That means that you're understanding things. It's the inner experience, a connection to creativity, trying to explain something I saw that drives me. I like that. Sorry you're taking offense to me being here, Tyler. Wasn't my intention to disrupt. I generally do watch for support, but I avoid them. Daniel, I'm not offended by you being here. I want you here. If you're here and you're being honest, I want you here. I want anybody here who's honest. I'm sorry if that was like not understood, but I disagree with you about whether or not atheism is a possible concept to even exist. But I want you here if you want to be here. And you've been very respectful. Why would I be offended by you being here? I'm not offended at all. I hope you're still here, and let me know in the chat. But I want you here if you want to be here. I want people here who are willing to challenge me. That's good. In the beginning of this, I was just making videos, and within like 4 or 5 videos that I made and then posted, I was bored, and I couldn't maintain any consistency. But since I started going live, I'm here every week. I've never been so consistent about anything in my life. And guys, I never did my homework. I'm here every week. That's amazing. And it is because of the live viewers that I get to interact with. It's the real people that it drives me. So I want you here. Even if you're challenging me, that's fine. If you do it respectfully and honestly, good. I'd rather have you here than somebody that's just like saying, yeah, you're so right, Tyler. But I want anybody who's honest. Hey guys, what's going on? What's up, memes of destruction? Okay. There's a great difference between one's faith and one's intellect. A person's intellect can bolster their faith, but I'm not positive a person's faith can do the same with their intellect. I don't think that that's the right stance. Someone's theism can bolster their logic, and someone's logic can bolster their theism. That's a better way of putting it than faith versus intellect. Your logic can be supported by your theism, and your theism can be and your theism can support your logic. That is a two-way street, but I know that. But I don't like the way that I don't agree with the phrasing of what you said, but so I'll rephrase it. But I think it was a good direction to take it. The thing is, no one can come to the sun unless first called. So why do you think that's different for different people? Overall predestined type 4D planning. God decides, and you decide whether or not you come to a relationship. A relationship is mutual. With anyone is mutual, always. Daniel, Preston, Landon, James, Beresworth, and Tyler, what's up? There's may not be a multiverse. It may only be the one. What if there isn't a beginning? There was a beginning, but to the universe, but the existence is eternal. It's actually simple. Another person's because you have to know what time is and where it comes from, but it comes from the interaction between sentient agents and the structure, their nested structure within each other that causes the perspective of space-time. So that's for another stream. I don't have time to get into it now, but you can look at God in the multiverse. No. It's called the something in the space-time in the Observerse. It's a video that's early on in my channel. If you watch that, I kind of explain it. All right. It's not a disbelief. It's not having a belief. You can't do that. Like I said, I think most seem to internally probably know the answers internally and spiritually, and no, that's not disbelief. That's laziness of mind. Well, agnosticism is not laziness of mind, but it can be. It's like can also be cowardiceness of fear of insulting God and fear of insulting the people that you're around. If you're around religious people and you're an atheist, maybe you say you're an agnostic. But if you're around atheists but you're a theist, maybe you say you're agnostic because you don't want to piss off God. I don't know, but like there's multiple reasons why people say I'm an agnostic, but I think that it's usually fear motivated. But sometimes laziness. Where does time fit in? Look, like I said, look at my video, Space-Time in the Observerse. I talk about time. That's a good question. 80% of the billion on this. 80% of the 8 billion people firmly believe in God and live their lives to that idea. Yes. Praise the Lord. Science can't figure out the origin of the universe, but denies God. Yeah. I think the problem related to what you say is that two sides of the coin are seen as separate, and when within science we have people that put their heads on one another without reconciling them. Yes. Because in truth, if God exists through theism, there's also the possibility of rejecting him personally through atheism, so both options are valid and we need to recognize the potentiality for both. Don't know what you mean. But people can personally reject God's authority, but you have to reject God's existence in order to truly reject God. You have to embrace God's existence in order to truly reject his authority. Like evil, the worst evil is done by those who understand good, like and are done for truly selfish reasons that are not just like, I don't know, addiction or like bad habits or something. It's like you're doing rituals to get wealth or something like that. People do that. That does exist, but it's very, very rare. in the inner experience and connectivity. Trying to explain. Okay. You took the resources test in school, 4-wheel, 4-stick on a rubber band. I think I did do that. I'm not from the US, so I don't know. I'm from the US. I'm reading the chat. We should pay herpetologists more money for equity's sake. That would be nice. Do you have a Discord account? I do have a Discord account. If you would like to join our Discord, every Thursday evening at 7 p.m. we have open, 7 p.m. Pacific time, we have open calls. Anybody can join and talk about anything. If you want to join the Discord, private message me on my personal Instagram, Tyler Marshall Goldstein, or my Theory of Everyone Instagram, and ask me for the Discord link, and I'll send it to you. I don't post here, but if you want to join, just ask me for it, and I'll give you. It's open to anybody, but you just have to ask. And we have open calls every week, and it's a great group. So I really, really am grateful for and like our Discord community quite a bit. But you do have to ask to join. But that's all you have to do. There isn't there's nothing else you have to do, but just to ask. But it just keeps the trolls away. Trolls tend to not ask for the link, so they don't care that much. It's not like a ritual, or anything like that. You don't have to qualify. There's nothing like that. Do you have? They test you in the U.S. by giving you the resources, but 0 hints, and you have to make the resources move to the wall. My question is, how have you heard? Do you want to hit it? I don't know what you're talking about, but I think there's a conversation happening that I was not a part of. If I knew more about knots, I could ditch the band halfway, reducing resistance. Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about exactly, but I think I know something about. I think that I know the activity that you're referencing in school. Give me your username instead, or Discord ID if you have a Discord account and don't want to make the first move. Yeah, I don't know what's happening there, but like I said, if you want to join the Discord, just private message me on Instagram or Twitter at Tyler M. Goldstein, and the links are all down below in the description, and I will give you the link. Tomorrow night we are having a call, so looking forward to that. With that, thank you everybody. To everyone who participated in the chat, please hit the like button, share this with anybody who you think would find it valuable. It really helps fuel this content. I hope you found it valuable. I am very grateful to Brian and Eric for having this discussion and sharing it with everybody. Whenever I say that every week, I really do mean it. A lot of people have private discussions, but it takes guts to have a public discussion on things that aren't, a real discussion. I'll just say that. It takes guts to have a real discussion that's not scripted and put it online, and any discussion, and not do it anonymously. Eric said in this, he's like, banned 2 things. One of them was something that I forgot, and the other one is anonymous chess, online chess. Basically what he's getting at is that anonymity online causes problems, and I do agree with that. I understand why people do it, because you people get persecuted for things that they say, but just try and be as impeccable with your word as you can, and if you're honest, then you won't care if you're persecuted or you won't care as much for saying what is honest and kind. Be honest and kind, and if you do that, then you should be able to put your face to it. And if you're not doing that, then you shouldn't be posting it anyways. That's kind of how I feel. Still listening. Interesting as usual. Just busy. Cool. Anyways, with that, thank you guys. And like I said, I want anybody who is honest and, as a participant in the chat or viewer or whatever, if you're honest, it doesn't matter that you disagree with me. I want those people who disagree with me and who are honest about it. And I completely respect you I respect you more almost for being here and disagreeing with me and being honest and kind about it. And so I'm not offended ever. by people's disagreements. So if it ever comes off that way, then I apologize. That's not what I'm trying to convey. But with that, thank you, everybody. Peace, and till next week.